Silent Scream. True Stories of Oppression in Turkey is an account of the brutal persecution by the Erdogan regime through the testimonies of the victims that it targeted. It is all these true stories that make up this book, and these stories must have been documented so they would not be repeated in the future. These stories then must be told and retold only to remember what happens when the powerful goes corrupt. Silent Scream. True Stories of Oppression in Turkey by Advocates of Silence Turkey.
First off, the book consists of 3 stories told from the perspectives of 3 separate women who have lived through different forms of persecution under the Erdogan regime in Turkey. The book is a deceptively simple read, and I say deceptively because even though it can reasonably be read in a couple of hours, I can guarantee that you'll be left under the impression of these stories for quite a long time afterwards. Personally, I was continually astonished by the perseverance and the patience not only these women, but also their young children and their families showed in the face of great, almost unimaginable difficulty. The book was also significant in that it helped me recommit to justice. I think many of us, simply by reading the news or, interacting with the events in Turkey or people who have lived through these events. But the first story is about a woman and her family living through the coup and the events that followed, and then deciding to migrate and what that looked like, what sort of difficulties they faced afterwards. The second story was, I think, the most impactful. It was about a woman who went through similar things, but who was unable to migrate and who lost her family on the way, and the sacrifices that she made in that decision. The last story is from the perspective of a woman who was unjustly imprisoned, and she talks a lot about what it's like to be reacquainted with freedom after imprisonment. She talks a lot about the conditions in prison and how they were treated by the guards. In these stories, we see a lot of what Turkey looks like currently. We see the formation of a police state. We see the psychological and material toll of imprisonment on not only those who are imprisoned, but also their families. We see the inhumane conditions in these prisons. We see what the effects of social isolation are. We see what the loss of economic support looks like for these families. We see the disruption of families themselves. And we see the difficulty, ordinary life events, such as pregnancy, while living under a state of oppression. So even though the stories are not written in a legal language, they're entirely just narrative, they really make a legal analysis that I think is simple enough for everybody to understand. They wonderfully show how corrupt the judicial and the legislative systems in Turkey have become, and how this corruption has diffused through society.
Silent Scream. True Stories of Oppression in Turkey is an account of the brutal persecution by the Erdogan regime through the testimonies of the victims that it targeted. It is all these true stories that make up this book, and these stories must have been documented so they would not be repeated in the future. These stories then must be told and retold only to remember what happens when the powerful goes corrupt. Silent Scream. True Stories of Oppression in Turkey by Advocates of Silence Turkey.